Hi, and welcome to K-Club Week 3. Today's topics, we're going to cover some forms, your research strategy section of your grant, significance, innovation, and approach. Those are all subsumed within research strategy. Then we'll talk action items. So forms, just a heads up that each FOA tells you what set of forms to use for your K application. So often is the SF424 R&R forms and instructions. And later on in the course, we'll go through these forms, and from time to time, we may mention SF424. So I just wanted to give you a heads up that that is what we are talking about when you see SF424. If you don't use the correct forms based on the FOA, your application may be delayed or not accepted for review. So please read the fine print of your FOA before diving too deep into this process. Okay, so here we have our K application sections again. So last week we went over specific aims and NIH biosketches. This week we're going to go over research strategy, which is a 6-page document. It includes 3 sections: significance, innovation, and approach. And today we'll be going full force into significance and innovation, and next week we'll be doing approach. So you've got your overarching research strategy, 6 pages max. Unlike specific aims, citations are required in this section. So specific aims, you don't need to cite particular studies to back up your claims or points, but in this section, you do need to do that. So the research strategy is composed of significance, which is where you expand on specific aims. It's like the introduction to a manuscript. Then innovation, which explains the novelty of your theory, approach, and/or methods. And then finally, the approach. This explains the study design, methods, and statistical analyses to accomplish each of your specific aims. So we'll go through these sections one at a time. Starting with significance. So out of your 6 pages, you want to maybe spend 1.5 pages or less going over the significance of your proposal. Answering the question, okay, so what? Why are you doing this? What's the big deal? So explain the problem and why it is horrible. You've already done this for specific aims, so you can use the same opening sentence if you'd like. Just make sure to include citations. Describe the knowns and unknowns in the literature. Again, take from specific aims and add a few more details if you need to. Clearly say what the gaps are in the literature that your project will address. Mention preliminary data that you are basing your central hypothesis on and where the data are from. Then state your overall study design, your central hypothesis, and your specific aims. For positive impact, first explain how the project will improve at least one of the following: scientific knowledge, technical capability, and/or clinical practice. For positive impact 2, describe how the field will be changed if your specific aims are achieved. So how will the field be changed regarding concepts, methods, technologies, treatments, services, and/or preventative interventions? So this is the main stuff you're covering in significance. A lot of it you can pull from your specific aims and add a few more details and citations. So significance. You have most of this info already in your specific aims. Think of this section as an intro to your manuscript, and make sure to include citations to support all of your statements. They will go in a bibliography and references cited section. Make sure to cover the gaps in the literature that address both the K99 and R00 phases of your study. Here you can include an overview of your study, like in terms of groups, conditions, anything relevant to testing your specific aims. But study details, like inclusion, exclusion criteria, that sort of thing, go in the approach section. Let's go through an example of significance. I picked one that's relevant to postdocs at LIBOR, but let's say my grant is titled Real-Time fMRI Neurofeedback to Reduce Suicidal Ideation and Opioid Use Disorder. Treatment outcomes as a function of biological sex. So we have a big problem with opioid addiction in Oklahoma. We are able to study both sexes when it comes to individuals with this disorder. And we have access to real-time fMRI neurofeedback as a potential intervention for reducing suicidal ideation. So let's get to it. First, I'm going to define the problem and why it is horrible. So in this example, opioid use disorder, or OUD, is a chronic relapsing condition associated with a $75 million public health burden attributable to a 350% increase in deaths over the past 2 decades. I would add a citation there to back up these claims, and then say up to 30% of OUD overdoses are intentional suicide attempts, and suicide risk is over 6 times the national average, 8 times for women versus 2 times for men. And then I'd add citations there. So first, define the problem. Step 2, explain the knowns and unknowns, covering both K99 and R00. So again, you would take that from your specific aims. So let's list some knowns. Although research suggests that opioid medication management can be effective to manage OUD symptoms, over 50% of individuals with OUD still relapse within 3 months, despite this medication. Known number 2, real-time fMRI neurofeedback targeting increased activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPSC, and greater focus on positive goal-directed activities has been successful in reducing suicidal thoughts and plans in women, but not men, with major depressive disorder. So first I was talking about opioid use disorder, now I'm switching to neurofeedback, my methods, and the success in reducing suicidal ideation, which is the main goal of this proposal. My third known is that multiple studies demonstrate that over 50% of men and women with OUD meet criteria for comorbid MDD. So there's the link between depression, suicidal ideation, and greater than 40% of users report that suicidal thoughts drive their drug use. And finally, OUD show lower fMRI signal in VMPSC than controls during emotional processing tasks. So I'm linking together the last few set of knowns to pull my story together, a rationale for why I'm using real-time ventromedial prefrontal cortex fMRI to target suicidal ideation in OUD patients. Step 3 is the gap in the literature. So a crucial gap in the literature is the effective interventions to reduce relapse and deaths in people struggling with OUD, particularly those contemplating suicide. The present study addresses this gap by testing the utility of VMPFC real-time fMRI neurofeedback in reducing suicidality and relapse for treatment-seeking men and women with comorbid OUD and MDD. So you'll see I bolded a crucial gap in the literature, and the present study addresses this gap. Both of those things highlighting, holding the reviewer's hand as to what's important, so they can check off boxes saying I covered it. Okay, step 4, preliminary data. We conducted a pilot study testing this neurofeedback paradigm that had previously shown success in female MDD patients. Our preliminary data, again, I've bolded that to hold the reviewer's hand, show that 10 women, 5 with comorbid OUD and depression, and 5 controls completed the active neurofeedback condition and were successfully able to increase VMPFC activity as well as engage in positive goal setting. Here I'd show a figure or table and statistics. And now we're getting to the overall study design and central hypothesis that you can pull from specific aims. So the present study follows up our preliminary data by comparing OUD and MDD in controls on the degree of VMPFC upregulation during active versus sham neurofeedback conditions. So I have 2 conditions here, and determining whether successful VMPFC upregulation predicts lower suicidal ideation and lower drug craving in OUD post-scan 1 week, 4 weeks, and 12 weeks later. Our central hypothesis is that active VMPFC regulation and greater positive goal setting will decrease suicidal ideation and drug craving in OUD plus MDD, and that this relationship will be stronger in women than men. So again, I've highlighted our central hypothesis just to make it clear to reviewers that I've covered this in this section. Okay, specific aims. So again, you're reiterating what you have in your specific aims page. For this example, I can say the K99 phase focuses on cross-sectional real-time fMRI data collection and analysis of OUD plus MDD versus control groups, while the R00 phase focuses on the analysis of longitudinal relationships between brain activity, suicidality, and relapse within the OUD plus MDD group. The specific aim for the K99 phase of this project is to identify whether a degree of VMPFC upregulation differs as a function of group, so OUD plus MDD versus controls, as well as sex and condition, active versus sham VMPFC neurofeedback. The specific aim for the R00 phase of this project is to identify whether degree of VMPFC upregulation at baseline, biological sex and their interaction decreases future suicidality, drug craving, and relapse within 3 months in OUD plus MDD. So again, I'm highlighting, bolding the specific aim for the K99 phase and the specific aim for the R00 phase, making it super clear. Now we're at positive impact, number 1. So explain how the project will improve at least one of the following: scientific knowledge, technical capability, and/or clinical practice. This project will enhance scientific knowledge and clinical practice by determining whether VMPFC neurofeedback treatment for MDD can be successfully extended to OUD plus MDD populations that presently suffer from a lack of viable long-term treatment options. Positive impact number 2, describe how the field will be changed if your specific aims are achieved. So focus on concepts, methods, technologies, treatments, services, and/or preventative interventions. So for this example, if VMPFC neurofeedback is indeed successful in reducing suicidal ideation and opioid craving and use in women with OUD plus MDD, this neurofeedback protocol can be disseminated to clinics and hospitals worldwide to reduce suffering and early mortality in female opioid users. For positive impact 1 and 2, you can also explain how your study addresses specific strategic goals of the institute where you're submitting your grant. So for example, NIMH, you can search for NIMH strategic goals and it'll come up with a list. Same with NIDA, other centers and institutes, just Google strategic goals and see what their goals are. National Institute of Aging, same thing. Okay, step 9, briefly describe your training and career goals for the K99 and R00 phases of the award. So with respect to training goals, the K99 phase of this award will provide me with the mentorship and skills to obtain an assistant professor position, while the R00 phase of this award will support the development of my own research lab and pilot data for an R-level grant application, promoting my career as an independent investigator. So again, throughout this example, hold the reviewer's hand in the significance section. So make it as easy for the reviewer as possible to find the information they are judging you on and check off a box. Central hypothesis, specific aims, positive impact. Use bold font for significant sentences related to gaps in the literature, the central hypothesis, specific aims for the K99 phase are, specific aims for the R00 phase are, and so on and so forth. And now, after we've covered significance, we're moving on to innovation. So here you're writing a paragraph to explain the novelty of your theory, approach, and/or methods. So in this paragraph, you're going to explain how your application challenges current research or clinical practice paradigms. So describe any novel theoretical concepts, approaches, or methodologies, any novel instrumentation or interventions to be developed or used, any advantage over existing methodologies, instrumentation, or interventions. You can include results from preliminary studies in this section or the significance approach sections to show study feasibility. So for example, if you developed a fMRI neurofeedback protocol and have pilot data, it might be worth showing an innovation instead of significance, but up to you. Make sure to cover both K99 and R00 phases of your K in this section. So what makes something innovative? What are some examples that you can give me? Well, here we go. Make sure that you say why something is novel or innovative. Don't assume the reviewer to know why. So how is it better than whatever is traditionally done in the field? Some examples are machine learning. It's a hot topic in computational psychiatry right now, but why is it better than traditional statistics? Explain that to the reviewer. For real-time fMRI neurofeedback, why is it better than regular fMRI recording and or EEG neurofeedback? Giving people an immune challenge and then measuring blood biomarkers, why is it better than just measuring someone's blood at rest? Integrating EEG and fMRI data, why is it better than either method alone? Explain the strengths and weaknesses of each method alone, and then explain how those are mitigated when you put them together in terms of weaknesses. Exosomes, why are they better than peripheral blood markers of inflammation? Dyadic fMRI task, why are they better than solo fMRI tasks? These are all examples of things at LIBOR that people are studying that they will need to justify. And EEG microstates. So why are they better than traditional EEG frequency analyses? So be as clear as possible in explaining the advantages of your novel approach. Assume that the reviewer knows nothing about your method, statistics, intervention, or the literature where it came from. A NIH reviewer who is an expert on heart rate variability in adolescent depression may know very little about inflammatory cytokines, machine learning, or EEG and fMRI methodologies. Let's go through some examples of innovation. I believe there are 3 in here. The first one focuses on addiction and neuroimaging. So the recovery process is fundamental to our biological understanding of the dynamics of opioid use disorder. The goal for any intervention is to alter this dynamic, thereby reducing or eliminating the probability of relapse. This proposal is innovative because it will use rigorously characterized clinical brain and behavioral outcome measures to create a large OUD early recovery dataset. Use a comprehensive neuroscience-based approach probing interoception and aversive salience processes previously implicated in addiction in the K99 phase. Focus on a drug use population of highest national concern, opioids. Use a prospective longitudinal follow-up design and sequential assessments combined with sophisticated statistical approaches to chart recovery trajectories in the R00 phase. Quantify dysfunction across units of analysis of symptoms, behavior, and neuroimaging to develop predictive and sensitive typologies of recovery. This hypothesis-driven approach will enable us to determine major contributors to relapse, including but not limited to impairments in interoception, reward, punishment sensitivity, pain, and negative affectivity. So the innovation involved in this study, the longitudinal study looking at multi-level methods, clinical brain behavioral outcome measures to predict who relapses and who maintains early recovery in individuals with opioid use disorder. Let's move on to a second example, which is a bit shorter. This focuses on binge eating disorder and looking at food meal anticipation before an MRI scan. The proposed study is innovative because it provides a novel conceptual approach examining multi-level assessments of emotion in binge eating disorder, development and testing of a novel probe of emotional awareness in the fMRI environment in the K99 phase, and it is the first neuroimaging study to examine the interaction of meal anticipation with emotion in binge eating disorder during the R00 phase. So this is mostly focusing on the novelty of looking at emotion processing in binge eating disorder, because there's not much literature there, and the development of a meal anticipation probe related to emotional processing during fMRI scans. The third example is going to focus on neurobiology, neuropharmacology. The proposed research is innovative because we use an easy and non-invasive tool of blood sample collection to study inflammation from the brain towards diagnostic and therapeutic intervention. Specific microRNA exosomes derived from the brain may provide a mechanistic view of inflammatory subtypes of anxiety disorders. To date, only one study has investigated whole exosomal mRNA cargo alterations in mental disorders in humans. No studies have investigated this as a function of anxiety disorders. Because exosomes can cross the blood-brain barrier, we are able to capture brain-derived exosomes from a peripheral blood source. Using next-generation sequencing, a technology that can sequence millions of small fragments of DNA in parallel, we will be able to find aberrant miRNA profiles from brain-derived exosomes in 2 inflammatory subtypes of generalized anxiety disorder. Some of these targets may be useful for development of drugs to treat GAD and other anxiety disorders. So the novelty here is the brain-derived exosomes processed from blood and relating this to anxiety disorders in particular. Okay, so we've gotten through significance and innovation. Next week, we are going to go in depth into approach, which is sort of the methods of manuscript. We will cover that in more detail next week. So let's get to action items. So revise your specific aims based on primary mentor and program officer feedback, and then write drafts of your significance and innovation sections and get feedback from your primary mentor on those sections. Thanks, and see you next week.